present to you the key findings from the survey report. I just want to mention that this survey was actually made up of 10-point questions. And so it was very simplified questions and was straight to the point as to how the business environment perceive the economy and what the expectations are. So first we asked questions pertaining to their own performance. And as my colleague said, the first set of questions, that is the first half of the year 2017, actually expected them to compare their performance with the previous year's second half, that is 2016 second half of the year. So we asked the question, if you compare your performance of the first half to that of the second half 2016, how would you grade your performance? And we have three options where they choose whether better or their performance remain the same or worse for that matter. And so we found out that the blue strip there is actually for the first half of the year compared to 2016. And in that, the respondents, about 31%, think that their performance was better compared to second half of 2016. The 31 say the same in the same period, and then about 39% think that their performance has worsened in that regard if they compare their performance with the previous years, that is 2016 second half. Of course, that should be expected somewhat because that was when in that time was the first half was merely the year that the new government has actually taken place and still putting together its policies. And so you realize that businesses were actually not performing. There was some kind of wait and see kind of attitude in the economy. So we have that high recording of 39% thinking that in fact their situation or their performance has worsened. If we compare that with the second year's performance, that is the second section, the second half of the year, June to December, you realize that we recorded some better performance where about 46% think that their performance has improved compared to the previous half of the year, and that recorded about 46%. However, we still have significant proportion saying that the performance has not improved or either worsened about 23%. That constitutes more than 50% in that regard. So sector-wise, so if we look at the performance in sectors, so for example, we take the agri sector, and in agri sector, we have about 43%, actually, 43% saying that their performance worsened. That is the first half of the year, as against 17% which said improved. So the perception in the agricultural sector or the assessment in the agricultural sector suggests that the agricultural sector in the first half of the year didn't fare well at all. And industry also likewise compared their performance to 2016 second half of the year shows that about 38% mentioned that they have not performed well compared to their previous year's performance, whereas about slightly larger than a quarter of the respondents believe that they performed well. So overall, the first half compared to 2016 suggests that businesses did not fare well. In fact, their performance dipped in most cases. That's the first half of 2017. However, if we compare that with the second half of 2017, you realize that the blue strip, that is the better performance, started increasing And so we have agriculture saying 35 from 17 to now 35% in terms of performance, although they still have 39% still thinking that their performance did not improve or was worsened compared to the first half of the year. We have industry sector or industrial sector actually recording much better performance of about 47%. That compares to about 31% in the previous section. So industrial sector, actually, their performance was better compared to the second or the first half of 2016. And similar findings was also obtained in the services sector. So in the services sector, the second half, about 46% of the respondents or businesses that we interviewed believe that their performance was better compared to the first half, while about 55% either said they were the same or worsened in that regard. Okay, so if we look at the financial sector performance, so we try to group the financial and the non-financial services to just compare. And we realize that in both survey period, financial sector actually recorded much better performance. And that's quite striking. If you look at what is really happening now, then it's interesting to know how they were actually performing, on what basis they were performing that well. But you realize that if you also look at the data, you realize that their profitability levels in those periods was much higher. So financial sector actually is about 58% in the first half compared to 2016, mentioned that they performed better. While in second half, we have about overwhelming 71% of the financial sector mentioning that their performance was much better. That is a far cry from what was recorded in the non-financial sector, which actually recorded a worsened situation in the first half of the 2017 compared to 2016, which was about 42%. So the non-financial sector, other businesses' performance really wasn't that good within the services sector. And but a marked improvement was recorded in the second half of the year, which actually came out to about 44%, where 44% of the respondents actually said they performed better. It is still not the overwhelming majority because same and worsen, still carries the overwhelming majority of about 66%. So, yes. All right, so reasons underlying this better performance, like I said, the questionnaire was straightforward to just ask them to take the most three important factors that they think that explain their better performance in that year in question. And it was recorded that in fact, the main driver of better performance was increased orders for products and services, which means that the economy, confidence level in the economy started increasing in the second half. That led to sales and then products orders increasing, and that was overwhelming. 70% of the respondents believed that that was the key driver. Of course, favorable government policy also came second, indicating that some of the initiatives that the government introduced in the first half of the year appears to have some positive impact on businesses. So not so much, but about 10% believe that favorable government policy, explains perhaps their better performance. And then energy stabilization, the fact that the energy situation was improved in that year that we're talking about, particularly in the second half of 2017, also tend to have some positive impact on the production and on businesses. And that is followed by decrease in cost of production and then favorable tax regime, as may be the case. So, if we compare business expectation performance for 2017 second half with that of the first half, expectation of the first half of the year. So in the first half, we asked them about their expectations for the second half, business expectations. And in that, the results actually for the first half of the year actually shows that about 69% was expecting the economy to be better in the second half of the year. 69%. That compares to the second half where just about 46% expect the economy. Okay, so let me come this way. So whereas 69% in the first half of the year think that they expect the economy to be better, we realized that when it came to them comparing their performance in that first half, only 46% actually responded that the economy performed better, which means that for many of them, their expectations were not met in that particular year. So 69% believed that the second half was going to be better, but it ended up to reduce to about 46%, which actually fared better in the second year. And so also, those that worsened, I think the worsened one kind of improved significantly from 3% to about 23%. In terms of expectation for first half 2018, so we also asked questions pertaining to their expectation about the first half of 2018. That is the quarter that we just finished the first quarter. We are left with the second quarter. So in 2018, what are businesses' expectations for the year? And we compared that to their expectation for the second half of the year. And it came out, vast majority of businesses actually believe that they expect the economy in the first half to perform much better, about 82% in that regard, which means that they have very positive outlook of the businesses in this year, about 82%. And just about 23%, 12% think that it will remain the same, whereas just few less than 10% believe that it will worsen. So that obviously places enormous challenge on the government to ensure that these expectations are actually met in the first year. Of course, we'll get to know whether these expectations were actually realized in the first year if we do our next mid-year survey to find out whether these were actually the case. So in sector-wise, just to look at it from sector perspective, we also find that in the agricultural sector, yes, the same overwhelming result. About 65% think that in the first half of the year, their performance was actually going to be better for this year, and that is about 65%. And then industry recorded about 80%, and overwhelming majority of those within the services sector, actually, that's about 84%, believe that this first quarter, or the first half of the year 2018 is actually going to be better. So on the average, we have about 82% of all the businesses surveyed believing that this first year, or the first half of the year, was going to be much better for them. But compare that to what was recorded in the previous section, where they expected 69%, but they ended up only about 46% actually thinking that they perform well. We wait to see whether this will translate into actual performance for their businesses. Okay, so can you skip that? Yes, so we try to look at what areas were affected in terms of business decisions for firms. And we'll look at the key drivers of this performance, or what is informing this performance for the first or for the second half of the year, and then the first half of 2018. And apparently, first we focus on employment, whether the good performance that businesses reported actually translated into employment creation by businesses. And we actually found out that that wasn't actually the case, that about 61% of the respondents actually reported that they did not increase the number of the workforce, which was maintained about 61%. And in fact, about 16% actually decreased their workforce, the number of people that they employ, whereas 23% increase, or they kind of expanded by employing more hands. So that really raises issues about the ability of the economy, or the expansion to create enough jobs for the teeming majority or for the youth. And so, because businesses, although reported some kind of better performance, the employment generation capacities were very low. In terms of other activities, particularly in regard to investments, we realized that we found out whether in the given year their investment in fiscal capital, fiscal expenditures increases, or it maintained, or it actually reduced in that given year. And we also found out that more than 50% of the respondents said that they did not actually invest in any fiscal or capital expenditures, which means that there was not real expansion that actually took place in that given year. And so fiscal capital expenditures maintaining, or those that reported that they maintained their investment or that did not change, was about 56%, whereas 39%, which was quite significant, percent actually increased their investment in capital or in fiscal capital. And then activities that also received much attention was sales, as was earlier reported, that sales increased, and then for many businesses, sales increased by about 47%. And then, but for others, around 29%, it didn't change that much, whereas 25%, a quarter of the respondents believed that their sales actually reduced in the year in question. Profitability was quite okay, not so much. About 40% of the businesses reported increase in profitability, whereas 27 and 33, about 60% believe that it either maintained or it actually reduced. So profitability wasn't that encouraging in that regard. Okay, so what businesses intend to do in the coming year, in the first half of the year, we also try to gauge what are the key things that they intend to focus on in the second half of the year, that is 2018 second half. And we have a quite substantial amount of businesses believing that they are going to increase their expenditure in fiscal capital. So that indicates some kind of confidence in the economy. So we have about 57 or so percent saying that they intend to invest in fiscal capital. That obviously will bring some expansion in their business, and that would then also have some potential for job creation. But interestingly, when we asked whether they were going to increase their workforce, the number of people that they intend to employ in the first half of the year, we realized that 60% of the respondents actually was reported no, they were just going to maintain the existing workforce. So not much is going to happen in terms of employment generation, although we have 33% thinking that they will increase it. Of course, if you become more optimistic and add the increase to the maintain, we will have about 93%. All right? Somebody too can decide to add the maintain to reduction, which then comes to about 68% in that regard. So not much will happen in the first half of the year in regard to employment as the data review. In terms of profitability, of course, you cannot run a business and say that you're not going to earn profits. So many of them, about 78%, think that the first half of the year is going to be better in terms of their profitability. And so that perhaps also may explain why they want to expand, invest in capital expenditure. So we also then want to gauge the business expectations about the macroeconomic environment. And you know, when we talk about the macroeconomic environment, we're looking at the exchange rate. What is the expectations about the exchange rate? What is the expectations about the lending rate? What is the expectation about inflation and economic growth? Because this is very important, particularly for the central bank in its inflation targeting framework. Expectations about the future level of inflation and exchange rates have far-reaching implications on the rates, the spot rate, and even the future rates of these indicators. So we asked about what they think about the first half of the year 2018. What did they expect the exchange rate to be? Of course, stable exchange rate, most of them, about 49%, slightly lower than half, think that they expect the exchange rate to be stable in that regard. And for me, that is good because that can contain their speculative activities. If you expect it to be stable, then you may shy away from speculating on the currency. And that can actually lead to the stability that they are looking for. Then they also expect, actually, in the first half of the year, for average lending rate to reduce. And that we have a greater majority of the respondents saying, that's about 53%, saying that they expect credits or lending rates to reduce in the first half of the year. Inflation, quite good. We have about 48% believing that they expect inflation to reduce, and about 42% think they think that inflation is going to be stable. So putting the two together, meaning we have about 90% of the business environment expecting inflation to either be stable or reduce. And for me, that is quite good. It's very good for central bank because then it kind of anchors inflation expectations and reduce pressures on inflation to reduce in the near future. So that is good. Economic growth, yes. We have the majority of the people or of the firms believing that they expect the economy to accelerate. That's about 77%. Growth expectation is very high. And so we then drill down to find out what were the main constraints facing businesses' performance in this year in question. So what were the binding constraints? We listed a number of binding constraints, and we asked firms to rate them in order of importance, to select 3 in order of importance. And at the end of the exercise, the report indicates that most of the businesses actually cited high costs of raw materials as the number one binding constraint. In fact, that was in the first half of the year survey, we have a topping of about 21%. And the same thing was recorded in the second half. It's still top as the number one binding constraint. Cost of inputs, cost of raw materials, intermediate products came up on top as far as business constraint or inhibiting factors. The second one was actually high costs of credit. Interest rates came out on the average for the two periods. For the first period was 18%, and then it reduced to 12% in terms of it being a binding constraint on businesses. The next important one was high taxes and government charges. Also came up in the second half of the year to be one of their constraints. And we also have utility charges also coming up as the fourth constraint. And then another significant factor that came up in both sections was low and insufficient demand for their products. So, top 5 constraints in sectors. Of course, we don't expect the constraints to be uniform across sectors. So we also looked at sector-specific constraints, whether there are variations in sector-specific constraints. And it came up clearly that in the agricultural subsector or sector, here again, costs or high costs of inputs, that is raw materials, came on top as the number one binding constraint. And it was closely followed by excessive influx of imported products. Of course, what we've been seeing in the agricultural sector, high imports on rice and on poultry and others, for many of them, they think that it is a constraint. It's not allowing them to sell their produce. So for many agricultural sector, it's cost of input, fertilizers, implements, tools, and others were key binding constraints, and then also importation with the dumping of poultry products, rice, tomato, and others from neighboring countries, and all of that. And then in this industrial sector, in the industry, not too surprising too, we have overwhelming majority of them thinking that input costs still remain a constraint, followed by insufficient demand for their products, and then costs of borrowing in that order. In the services sector, quite evenly distributed, we have high taxes, which should be expected because that is where the excise tax and the VAT and others are often fed. So they reported high taxes in that, and then also high cost of credit also came up, as well as utility tariffs. So in summary, we reporting that overall 46% of business interviewed performed better in the second half of 2017 compared to 31% recorded in the first half of 2017. 71% of businesses surveyed in the financial sector performed better in the second half compared to 58% recorded in the first half of the year. So there's a marked improvement there. 44% of business surveyed in the non-financial sector performed better in the second half compared to 27.7% recorded in the first half. So the opposite is the case, which means that about 66% either perform worse or performance was worse or remained the same. Overall business environment, so this is the global, the business environment, the macroeconomic environment. 51% of businesses indicated the business environment improved in the second half of the 2017 compared to 44% that was recorded in the first half of the same year compared to the 2016 performance. And so that also shows some good performance. Regarding expectations about the future, that is the first half of 2018, as I mentioned previously, 82% of the respondents reported that they expect business environment, their business to perform better in the first half. about 82%, whereas 83% also, in the same manner, think that the business environment is likely to improve. So very positive expectation or outlook for the business environment for the year 2018. So the optimism expressed by businesses can be seen, so we can break down this, which I have already mentioned that. So we can perhaps go to the recommendation side. All right, so given these findings, what are our key recommendations for government to pay attention to in order to improve the business environment and to create a necessary enabling environment for private sector to thrive? So first, the number one constraint, as we just mentioned, was high cost of raw materials. And we think that businesses should be encouraged, actually, to source their raw materials from within. Because if you are able to find your raw materials here, you avoid certain costs. Costs in relation to import tariffs, costs in relation to the exchange rate. You can avoid all of that. But of course, some of the problems that businesses have cited is low level of production or capacity in producing some of these raw materials in the country, even from the agricultural sector and from the industrial sector. So many of them resort to actually importing. And so we recommended that the government should accelerate the agricultural transformation agenda, and in particular, quicken the implementation of the one district, one factory, that is 1D, 1F, and then 1V, 1D, one village, one dam initiative, in order to create both forward and backward linkages with industry. These are key to ensuring that businesses are able to source their key intermediate product or input or raw materials from within, so that they can avoid high cost of importation of these products. And government should further ensure the full implementation of the ECOWAS Common External Tariff, because even as of now, within the ECOWAS Common External Tariff, it actually grants a zero import tariff or 5% tariff on some selected raw materials or inputs. And so we want that some are still attracting some kind of taxes. So we say that government should fully implement the CET to ensure that, raw materials, agricultural raw materials or industrial raw materials actually become tax-free and reduce all importation bottlenecks at the harbor. So actually facilitating trade and reducing service costs and all of that. So the next recommendation will center on the high costs of credit that we seem not to be going away. Lending rates, we've said it several times, that it's a binding constraint on businesses. Businesses, even today where inflation is almost getting to single digit, lending rate still revolves around 25 to about 35%, very high. We have monetary policy rates actually coming down to about 18%, yet lending rates remain very high, and in fact is one of the highest, as we have often said, in West African region. So if you want your businesses to be competitive and to be able to compete effectively in international market, then you need to do something about high lending rate. And we believe that one of the key causes of high lending rate has to do with the high non-performing loans that banks are currently having in their books. So measures, far-reaching measures have to be taken in order to reduce this non-performing loans, because it's also threatening even the stability of the entire financial system. What we are seeing now, largely to do with high non-performing loans and high bad debt provisions. And so government should do something, one, by reducing the arrears to contractors and all of that. I mean, that will go a long way to reducing non-performing loan, because then contractors and other firms that do business with government can't be able to honor their debt obligation with the banks. And the financial system themselves, the banking sector, should also increase their mobilization efforts in terms of savings mobilization. I think they have relaxed so much in terms of their effort to mobilize more savings, particularly from the non-bank financial markets. They have to step that in order to reduce costs of funds, because cost of funds also eat into cost of lending. If you are not able to mobilize enough savings, which provides you with much cheaper cost of funds, you'll be compelled to raise high cost equity and high borrowing in order to back your lending activities. So mobilization of savings should increase, and then the central bank should also endeavor to make transparent the formula for determining interest rates. I mean, more transparent for us to know the buildup. We know that the central bank has taken a step in revising the base rates, and now seem to have changed the name from base rate to reference rate. But there's a need for the industry players to understand how even banks form these reference rates. What are the key factors that determine it? How much of the operational cost do they charge to the lending rate? How much of their profitability or risk are put on lending rates? These have to be known, so some kind of transparency can come to bear, and also reduce tacit collusion or whatever that it is that is making lending rate very rigid downward. So we also look at low insufficient domestic demand that businesses reported, and one of which is that in the first half and in the second half, the economic activity quite slow, and largely because of the front-loaded fiscal consolidation that government was pursuing. And so government expenditure actually reduced, and that reduced also economic activity. And we all know that government is the biggest spender in the economy. So if government is not spending that much, then it's tend to affect demand, will fall short of what is expected. So the recommendation here is that government should stimulate demand by stepping up its expenditure in order to boost aggregate demand and to increase demand for domestic businesses. We're also making a case for people to patronize made-in-Ghana products. It's very important to drive demand for local goods, because, if upon all the favorable regulatory policies government is churning out and the improved business environment, if people are not ready to patronize these made-in-Ghana goods, it will amount to nothing, because they will still not be able to break even, and in no time they will go out of business. So they also reported, of course, high taxes and utility charges. We reckon the fact that government has done something about this issue, reducing some taxes on petroleum, and also reduces utility tariffs. And so, by and large, something is being done in this regard. But we are saying that perhaps further reduction may be warranted in order to spare further production in the sector, since businesses still believe that utility prices remains high, particularly compared to other neighboring countries. Can you move? Yes, so these are other factors that they reported. On stable exchange rate. We think that find some stability. We have recorded some relative stability in exchange rate, but often the sustainability has been an issue. So government should ensure that the relative stability being enjoyed now is sustained over a long period of time. That will help businesses to plan, that will encourage investments, and then reduce the swings and the fluctuations in the economy. And then the excessive influx of imported product, which is also killing infant and burgeoning industries. It's a key problem for businesses. The government should find a way of protecting infant industries. It's very important, particularly those in the agricultural value chain, poultry and then the rice. I think the time has come that we mount some kind of protective block to, help these local industries to be able to compete in order for them to also meet the domestic market. Thank you very much.